Kamala Harris has come out on top as the frontrunner for the Democratic nominee for the 2024 election. She's the first female, first black, and first South Asian vice president of the United States. As a Democratic frontrunner following President Biden's decision to step down, Harris's life and career are under more intense scrutiny than ever before. This essay will dig into her background, early life, education, political career, time as vice president, and controversies to provide a holistic view of her political career. From her early days as a prosecutor to her role as vice president, she's consistently run on platforms of addressing issues of systemic inequality and promote social justice. Her tenure as Attorney General of California and her subsequent election to the United States Senate gave her a platform to push her infamous criminal justice reforms, environmental protection policies, and consumer rights policies. In the 2020 presidential campaign, Harris's selection as Joe Biden's running mate put her on the radar for most of the American populace who are not necessarily into politics as a hobby or as a career. As vice president, Harris worked as the forefront of the Biden administration's efforts to combat the pandemic, promote economic recovery, and advocate for voting rights. I'm not here to tell you what to believe, so do your own research about her policies from different reliable sources and come to a conclusion about her policies yourself. Harris's career has not been without adversity. Her record as a prosecutor has faced scrutiny from both progressives and conservatives, and her presidential campaign in 2019 was rife with infighting between her and other Democrats, and flip-flopping on policy positions. But I'll go more in depth about her controversies later on into the video. Kamala Devi Harris was born on October 20th, 1964 in Oakland, California. Her mother, Shamla Gopalan, was a Tamil Indian cancer researcher and civil rights activist, while her father, Donald Harris, is a Jamaican-American professor of economics. Harris was raised with influences from both her South Asian and African American roots. She identifies as both black and South Asian and has embraced her multicultural background throughout her career. If you want to argue that Jamaicans aren't black, that's irrelevant to the video, so my opinion is that they are, and I'll move on. Harris's upbringing was deeply influenced by their background. Her mother ensured that Kamala and her sister Maya were both exposed to their Indian and African American heritage. They attended both African American churches and Hindu temples, participating in a variety of cultural and religious traditions. This diverse upbringing allowed Harris to develop a unique perspective on identity and community, which is very obviously reflected in her political ideology and approach to governance. Harris has often spoken about the importance of representation and has used her platform to advocate for marginalized communities. Her multicultural background has enabled her to connect with a broader coalition of voters and build a diverse political base, which has caused some opponents of hers to call her a quote-unquote DEI hire, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to try and garner votes from women and minorities. I won't comment on this as it's irrelevant to this section of the video, but I may or may not cover it in the controversy section of the video. We'll see. Harris's religious background has also played a role in sharing her values and beliefs. Raised in both the Baptist and Hindu traditions, she has often spoken about the importance of faith in her life. While she identifies as a Baptist, she continues to honor her Hindu heritage and has participated in Hindu rituals and celebrations. This spiritual diversity has contributed to her inclusive approach to politics and governments, and Harris's ability to bridge cultural and religious divides has been a big factor in her political success and her appeal to a wider range of voters. Kamala Harris's early life was shaped by activism and academic endeavors of her parents. After her parents divorced when she was 7, Harris was primarily raised by her mother in Berkeley, California. Her mother's dedication to civil rights and social justice deeply influenced Harris and her sister, and the mother's commitments to these causes were demonstrated through active participation in the civil rights movement at the time during the 1960s and 70s. This early exposure gave Harris a strong sense of justice and a desire to effect positive change in society. Growing up in Berkeley during the 1960s and 70s, Harris experienced firsthand the vibrant political and social atmosphere of the time. Her mother often brought her to protests, to community meetings, and other events where Harris observed the power of collective action and the importance of standing up for one's beliefs. This environment fostered her early interest in public service and laid the groundwork for her future career in law and politics. Harris's education began at Thousand Oaks Elementary School in Berkeley, where she was part of a pioneering busing program aimed at desegregating public schools. This experience gave Harris an early understanding of the complexities and challenges of racial integration. She later attended middle and high school in Montreal, Canada, where her mother had accepted a teaching position. This international experience broadened Harris's worldview and exposed her to different cultures and perspectives. Kamala Harris pursued a higher education with a focus on law and public service starting at Howard University, a historically black university in Washington, D.C., known for its rigorous academic environment and rich history of producing influential black leaders. At Howard, she majored in political science and economics, which laid a strong academic foundation for her future career. During her time at Howard, Harris was actively involved in student organizations and activities. She joined the debate team, participated in student government, and became a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, the oldest historically African-American Greek-letter sorority. These experiences helped her develop leadership skills, build a network of like-minded individuals, and gain a deeper understanding of the political and social issues affecting the African-American community. Harris has often spoken about the transformative impact of her time at Howard and described it as one of the most formative experiences of her life. After graduating from Howard University in 1986, Harris pursued her JD at UC Hastings College of Law. For any UC students who don't know what UC Hastings is, it's UC San Francisco today. For any UC students who don't know about UCSF, I assume you're not looking into grad school. Anyway, Harris graduated from UC Hastings in 1989 and was admitted to the California Bar in 1990. Her political career kicked off at the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, where she served as Deputy District Attorney from 1990 to 1998. In this role, she specialized in prosecuting child SA cases. Her meticulous approach to legal proceedings and her empathy for victims earned her a reputation as a skilled and compassionate prosecutor. Mind you, this was still relatively early into her career compared to where she is today with the reputation she has now. But we'll get there when we get there. In 2003, Harris was elected as the District Attorney of San Francisco, making history as the first black woman to hold the position. Her campaign focused on reforming the criminal justice system and addressing issues, notably recidivism and community policing. Upon taking office, Harris implemented several initiatives to try and reduce crime and improve public safety. One of her notable programs was the Back on Track initiative, which gave first-time nonviolent offenders job training and education opportunities instead of incarceration. This program was widely praised for its innovative approach to reducing recidivism and promoting rehabilitation. During her tenure as district attorney, Harris faced several high-profile cases that tested her leadership and decision-making abilities. One such was the prosecution of Edwin Ramos, an MS-13 member and undocumented immigrant accused of murdering a father and his two sons for being enemies of the gang. Harris's office faced criticism for not taking the death penalty, a decision she defended based on her long-standing opposition to capital punishment. Ramos is currently serving 3 life sentences without chance for parole, and the first of which started on June 11, 2012. Harris's work as district attorney laid the groundwork for a future political career. Her efforts to reform the criminal justice system and her focus on protecting vulnerable populations garnered her a lot of attention and support. In 2010, Harris announced her candidacy for Attorney General of California. Her campaign ran on an image of her commitment to justice, equality, and public safety. This resonated with voters across the state, and it ultimately led to her election as the first woman and black person to ever hold the office of Attorney General in California. In 2010, Kamala Harris was elected as the Attorney General of California, making another historic milestone as the first woman, black person, and first South Asian to hold office. Her tenure was rife with work on issues such as environmental protection, criminal justice reform, and consumers' rights. Harris gained national attention for her legal battles against major banks during the foreclosure crisis and her advocacy for LGBTQ rights. Her time as an Attorney General solidified her reputation and place on the American political stage. As Attorney General, Harris took on several high-profile cases and initiatives. She led a nationwide investigation into mortgage fraud and secured a $25 billion settlement for California homeowners affected by the foreclosure crisis. The settlement was one of the largest of its kind and provided huge relief to struggling homeowners. Harris's aggressive stance against financial institutions and her commitment to protecting consumers earned her widespread acclaim among California voters and reinforced her image as a tenacious and principled leader. Harris also focused on criminal justice reform during her time as Attorney General. She implemented the Open Justice Initiative, an online platform that made criminal justice data accessible to the public. This initiative aimed to increase transparency and accountability within the criminal justice system. Additionally, Harris advocated for policies that address the root causes of crime, such as poverty and lack of education. Her comprehensive approach to criminal justice reform had the objectives of prevention and rehabilitation. In 2016, Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate, representing California. As a senator, she served on several committees, including the Judiciary, Intelligence, and Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs committees. Harris was known for her sharp questioning during Senate hearings, particularly the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. This video has actually been circulating online a lot recently, and you can probably find it on Instagram and YouTube. Her ability to hold powerful figures accountable and her commitment to justice and equality made her a prominent and influential voice in the Senate. No, this paragraph isn't biased because this is indeed what she was known for. During her time in the Senate, Harris continued to advocate for progressive policies and social justice. She introduced legislation to address issues such as immigration reform, healthcare, and environmental protection. Harris co-sponsored the Medicare for All Act, which aimed to provide universal healthcare coverage. She also supported the Green New Deal, which was a comprehensive plan to combat climate change and promote. You know what? You're looking at it. You're watching a YouTube video about politics. You know what the Green New Deal is. Anyway. In August 2020, Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris as his running mate, making her the first black and South Asian woman on a major party's presidential ticket. The Biden-Harris campaign focused on addressing the pandemic, economic recovery, racial justice, and climate change. They ran on a platform emphasizing the need for comprehensive policies to combat systemic inequalities and promote social and economic justice. Harris's selection as a vice presidential nominee capitalized on Biden's promises to combat systemic inequalities and fight for social justice. Harris's background as a prosecutor and her experience in the public service were a compelling narrative to the Democratic and left-leaning centered voters that complemented Biden's message of unity and healing. The Biden-Harris campaign's success was also due to their focus on key battleground states and their effort to mobilize diverse voter groups. Harris's ability to connect with minority communities was the difference between winning and losing in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. On November 7, 2020, the Biden-Harris ticket was declared the winner of the presidential election with a record number of votes. Harris's historic election as the first female, first black, and first South Asian vice president was definitely a milestone in American history. Her election represented a breakthrough for women and minorities and served as a symbol of progress. As vice president, Kamala Harris has played a big role in the Biden administration's efforts to combat the pandemic, promote economic recovery, and address systemic racial inequalities. She led efforts to promote vaccinations, advocate for voting rights, and address immigration issues at the U.S.-Mexico border. Her time in office focused on trying to address the root causes of immigration from Central America. As any educated and responsible voter should know, most Latin American immigrants are from Central America, not from Mexico. Harris's most well-known responsibility as vice president was to lead the administration's efforts to combat the pandemic. She went all over the country to promote vaccinations and address vaccine hesitancy. Harris's outreach efforts have been important for increasing vaccination rates and ensuring that all Americans have access to life-saving vaccinations. Her work in this area reflects her commitment to public health and her dedication to protecting the most vulnerable populations. Harris has also been a vocal advocate for voting rights and electoral reform. She has also called for the passage of the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which aims to protect and expand voting rights and address issues such as gerrymandering and voter suppression. Gerrymandering, whatever you want to call it. Kamala Harris's career has not been without controversy. Her record as a prosecutor has faced a lot of criticism from both progressives and conservatives on different issues. Critics argue that her office was not aggressive enough in holding police accountable for misconduct and that some policies disproportionately affected marginalized communities. Additionally, her handling of truancy cases, where parents were prosecuted for their children's absenteeism, has been a point of contention. The Edwin Ramos case that I covered in Section 5 was met with criticism because Harris allowed a murderer to stay alive. This was already a controversial move, but Ramos was an MS-13 member who mercilessly slaughtered a whole family. The stunt didn't have much of an effect on her voters' opinion of her, since California's population has largely been against capital punishment anyway. Gavin Newsom actually outlawed the death penalty in March 2019, and he was met with similarly little criticism from Californians. Harris's time as Attorney General of California also saw a few contentious issues. Her office faced criticism for not pursuing more aggressive investigations into police shootings and for defending the state's use of solitary confinement in prisons. Additionally, some progressives criticized her for not taking a stronger stance on issues such as marijuana legalization and for her support of laws that targeted sex workers. These controversies have been a focal point for critics who argue that Harris's record as a prosecutor contradicts her progressive rhetoric. Maybe I'll make a video covering these things in depth on the line, but this video is a brief overview, and the script is already about to hit 9 pages. Harris's vice presidency has also been marked by controversy and challenges. Her handling of the immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border has faced criticism from both sides of the political spectrum. Some have argued that the administration's policies have not done enough to address the humanitarian aspects of the crisis, while others have criticized the approach as too lenient. Opponents of the Back on Track program felt that Harris allocating public funds toward the lowlifes and scum of society was a waste and that money could be better spent elsewhere. This is, if nothing else, an opinion, so I won't try to validate or debunk it. Finally, the biggest criticism I've seen on her online is that Harris claims to be pro-minorities but sent many black people to prison to do free slave labor. This argument hinges on the perception that her policies were unduly harsh and contributed to systemic racial inequalities. While it is true that the criminal justice system has historically disproportionately impacted black and minority communities, the data from Harris's tenure indicates that a relatively small number of marijuana convictions actually led to prison time. This means there's a more complex reality than the blanket accusation implies. Harris's tenure as District Attorney of San Francisco and later as Attorney General of California has been scrutinized, particularly for her handling of marijuana convictions, but during her time as a district attorney, Harris's office oversaw over 1,900 marijuana convictions, but only 45 of these convictions resulted in prison sentences. This nuance is really overlooked in the broader critique that she aggressively prosecuted low-level drug offenses, disproportionately affecting black and minority communities, either because the people purporting it are acting in bad faith, or because they actually don't know. But regardless, 45 out of 1,900 is a very, very small amount. In conclusion, while there is legitimate criticism of Harris's record on marijuana prosecutions, the claim that she disproportionately imprisoned black individuals for free labor doesn't necessarily align with the available data and with the empirical truth. The reality of her time in office shows efforts toward a reform and a nuanced approach to prosecution. Kamala Harris has taken clear stances on a few key issues throughout her political career. Here are some of her policies on major areas of contention. Criminal justice reform, advocates for ending cash bail, decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level, and expunging past marijuana-related convictions. She supports measures to address police misconduct and enhance accountability. Healthcare. Initially supported Medicare for all, but she since endorsed expanding the Affordable Care Act and introducing a public option. Climate change. Supports the Green New Deal and aims to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. She also advocates for rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and investing in renewable energy. Immigration. She calls for comprehensive immigration reform, including a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and protections for DACA recipients. She opposes the use of private detention centers. Economic policy. Proposes tax reforms to reduce income inequality, including higher taxes on the wealthy and on corporations. She supports increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Education. She advocates for universal pre-K, tuition-free community college, and reducing student loan debt. She supports increasing funding for public schools and teacher salaries. Gun control. She supports universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons, and closing loopholes that allow domestic abusers to obtain firearms. Women's rights. She's a strong advocate for reproductive rights, including access to abortion and contraceptives. Foreign policy. She supports strengthening our existing alliance, promoting human rights, and rejoining international agreements such as the Iran nuclear deal. She advocates for a diplomatic approach to international conflicts. In conclusion, this was a brief overview of Kamala Harris's career, and hopefully you're a bit more educated for when you decide to go vote. And if you're not, then I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I can appreciate the amount of research that you did before coming to this video. I don't know why you would even need to watch this video at all. But that's everything. Thank you for watching, and I'm just gonna stop recording now.